So my name is Kyle Cesmat. I am a engineer at Formidable. We are a software consultancy. We do work with React, Node, JavaScript, work with startup companies, Fortune 100 companies, and kind of everything in between. And yeah, something that I really felt passionate to talk about today was progressive web apps. Does anybody have any knowledge on progressive web apps in the room? A little bit. So something about progressive web apps. I'm just going to start by saying it's kind of a methodology. It's a way of thinking. It's something that I think you can use bits and pieces of in all of your web applications. Essentially, what a PWA is it's a application that's built for resilience. It's able to work in lower latency conditions when connectivity is spotty or you're offline. The ability to get value to the user as quick as possible. And I mean, frankly, we build stuff all day in a high-speed environment on a dev machine, and we know how applications work. A lot of times when we actually deploy to users, they end up on old Android devices, or somebody's on a 56K modem somehow. I don't know where you'd find one, but you find them. And we like to consider those people as the best we can. One, because everybody deserves to use the web, and two, because they can be paying customers. So we'd like to make our web applications performant for them. So yeah, they are widely accessible across devices and networks. So this is done using code that is platform agnostic, in the sense of you're building code that can work in Chrome, Safari, various applications. A PWA is an optimized application a lot of times. So they're applications that you're not shipping a 2 or 3 megabyte bundle to a customer. A lot of times you're giving them the quickest web experience possible, whether that be an HTML page with 2 lines of JavaScript, or using a framework that is pretty lightweight. And yeah, it's a with and installable capabilities. So in a sense, what a PWA is, it's a methodology, but it's also you're targeting a platform, in the case Android, where it can be an installable web app at that point. Alex Russell said it's not just a website, it's just a website that took all the right vitamins. So who's building PWAs? So these companies have chosen to build progressive web apps. Lyft was able to make their entire rider functionality inside of an HTML element page, which is kind of mind-blowing when you consider all the technologies there. But those exist in browsers, and we can target them today. Starbucks wanted to go into foreign markets, and it wanted to expand their reach and be more accessible to customers, meet them where they're at. Starbucks is big into native. They've always been a native Swift factory, and using the web, going to a www site makes a lot more sense for them in some cases. Pinterest recently just redid their entire mobile app with a PWA focus. A lot of their metrics revolve around, I think, 40% more ad revenue, 60% longer time on site, et cetera. And what they focused on was shipping a more lightweight bundle to the client. And people on slow internet connections were able to use Pinterest. And Twitter Lite, if you guys have all used Twitter on the web lately, you're using Twitter Lite. Some people have said it's faster than native. And that's because they took a lot of time to really focus on core functionality. And one thing that you can see in these applications is they are actually built in native shells. And that's because on a progressive web app on the Android system, you're actually able to save the app to your desktop or your screen and access it that way, online, offline. It's basically saving the site using a ton of technologies. It's only on Android right now. So Safari just got Serviceworker, or yeah, Serviceworkers, Safari 11, but not Safari 11 mobile. Nobody knows about that. So, talking about building a PWA, what are some of the things that are involved? We're going to talk about the PRPL pattern, purple pattern. So the first thing that you want to do when you're building an app that is a progressive web app is you want to push critical resources to the client as quick as possible. So this should be the only elements that the client needs to be able to render the first view. And the ways that you can push them are using code splitting. So pulling out all your vendor assets into one bundle and sending just basically the initial view. Another way that you can push assets to people these days is HTTP2. Does anybody know what HTTP2 is and how it works? So using HTTP2 and server push, basically when the client makes a request to the server already has an app manifest file, and they say, hey, you're going to need all these files to render the view. So a client might say, hey, we want to connect your website, and the server says, here's the bundle, here's all the assets and images, all in one request, as opposed to HTTP1 without server push, where your client says, hey, the domain connects to the server sends back an index file, that index file says, hey, we need all these assets, and there's a lot of back and forth. So you can actually push critical resources to the client for that first route. You'll want.
So do you have to use HTTP2 for PWAs then?
No,
like how else would you push?
So the idea is you're trying to push as minimal assets as possible, or all the assets at once. So you're pushing on just the initial bundle.
But why is it called push as opposed to pull? I mean, it's pulling, right?
Yes, HTTP1 is still pulling, yeah. These are kind of two different ways that you can achieve similar results. You either push fewer things, meaning a 50 kilobit bundle to the client, and then that bundle says, hey, we need a couple more things. Or with HTTP2, you can use them in tandem and just send a lot of small things at once. Both really good fundamentals, better than using just one giant 5 megabyte file all at once, and then saying, hey, we need these other things as well. Does that kind of make sense? Okay.
HTTP2, you want to have as many small files as you can, where like in the old days, used to make one big giant minute byte script, right? Now you want to break them down into small pieces and just send them all at once.
Yeah, and that's the idea with HTTP2, because they're each separate streams, I believe, at that point, which is why it's such an exciting technology. But it's, I think about 24% of websites right now are actually using HTTP2. It's not very well supported quite yet.
What percent of browsers work with HTTP2?
I think all modern browsers, I couldn't tell you about Safari. Safari is the new IE in my opinion. So yeah, after you've rendered the initial route, the next thing that you'll want to do is preload the remaining routes. So the general idea here is you're trying to send a very minimal viable view, and once the client's like, oh cool, I can use a website now, all those other routes, you might have an account route, you might have like a store route or something like that, all of those could be different bundles. And once this initial route loads, you can go and you can fetch those bundles behind the scenes because the client doesn't need them at that point. So you'll want to preload and basically prime the cache for the remaining routes. And then finally, the last thing that you can do is lazy load and create remaining routes on demand. So basically this purple strategy is something that is really suggested upon by Google. They're saying that this is kind of the way forward, that modern web apps should be producing kind of the network strategy, and so that way we can get people interactive really, really quickly. The purple pattern is implemented with Preact. Is everybody familiar with Preact at all? So Preact, in case you're unfamiliar, is a much smaller fork, essentially, of React. And Preact does a lot of stuff behind the scenes to basically come shipped with Preact CLI, which is their version of Create React App, and it comes shipped with a lot of things for code splitting and basically creating these modular bundles. I think their link component even breaks things out into their own code split component. The biggest part of a PWA is the service worker and app manifest. So Great React app has a service worker that comes with it now. That was a good contribution to the community. And most people are like, what does this do? Most of the time, you don't need to configure it. It just works with Create React app. And what it's doing is basically a service worker is an installed file within Chrome that will allow your app to be used offline. If somebody goes to your URL, Chrome basically uses the service worker to serve whatever last.js bundle was configured. And that's with Create React app. So service workers are kind of the key essential to working offline. And then an app manifest is all the boring information and logo file that says, this is what this app needs to be installed onto an Android device. So it's, yeah, all the meta information essentially. One thing that a lot of people overlook is optimizing your assets. You can get a lot of wins just by taking your 500 kilobit JPEG and reducing it down. I run all my SVGs through a tool called SVG OMG. That's just it's a really, really cool tool that just like strips out all the cruft. Because SVGs can get pretty ugly, especially when they're passed around from design team to design team. And then you're like, oh, I don't need all this sketch meta information. So yeah, SVG OMG strips it all out, makes it easy for you to work with, serves a smaller file. So yeah, always optimize your assets. And finally, using the platform. Chrome has a ton of built-in APIs that let you do things like trigger push notifications to your users, use background sync, which basically allows your web or your service worker to sync with another API while your app is backgrounded. So I know at least while it's in another tab, it might also be when your app is actually closed. I think you can still make requests with your service worker to get constant new information. So yeah, how do you go about implementing this with React Redux? A lot of ways that you can create PWAs today are persisting and restoring your Redux state locally. I don't know if anybody uses Redux heavily, but we have all that state, and essentially when a user leaves the site and comes back, we're resetting the state. So you could take that state and you can persist it locally, and then when your app is served offline, you can actually rehydrate that state from DynamoDB, I think, yeah, DynamoDB, no, IndexedDB, and I think you can choose your mechanism with different providers to store that state, and then you can just hydrate it when you need it again.
Kyle, how stable would you say with saving the state locally, would location hash be? Like saving that state as a hash locally or local storage?
So like recording the route that the user is on?
Mm-hmm. Locally, saving that to local storage.
I mean, you could do that if you're storing it within Redux. It's essentially a part of the state object, so you could store that locally, and if you needed that for whatever reason when you rehydrated, you could use that. I think the thing that I would say there is it's probably already stored in your history or the browser. In a lot of cases, if your URL is representative of your current state, it's already kind of saved there and not totally needed. Right. But yeah, I mean, definitely if it's part of the Redux tree, you can persist it and then rehydrate it later. So code splitting I touched on. You can use tons of different ways to split on routes. Modularizing your offline and online components. So the idea is if somebody loads your app and they are offline or low connectivity, you could show them a new view that is your online component while your other one is still catching up. Or if they're offline, you can give them an entirely different experience just by switching out componentry pretty quickly. And that's the beauty of React, is that it's all component based. There's plenty of libraries like Redux Offline that gives you a toolkit to store your state locally, to persist basically connection errors. You can handle poor connectivity. A lot of the things that get really ugly with offline and when you're not able to communicate with your server is make sense of that state later. So if you're letting the user, say, do create actions or things that you'll want to rectify later, it can get a little sticky. And Redux Offline is a tool that provides a lot of great support for that. Redux Persist, which I'll show you in just a minute. And then I included React Detect Offline, which is a plugin that one of my coworkers wrote that lets you, basically gives you an online and an offline component, and you can just render whatever you want inside of it. So if you're offline, you can show something new in there. It's a pretty cool little component. So yeah, additional considerations when you're building PWAs.
Can I ask you a question on that last slide?
Yeah.
So, like, which of those on that slide are specific to PWA? Like, when I think of PWA, I think of service worker. That's like new technology. You couldn't have done offline stuff without it, really. So when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking of things like local storage. Like, how much of this could we have done a year ago before PWAs? Like,
So a service worker basically, lets you use your app offline by serving you a JS bundle at that route. So we kind of need service workers in place to do that. And I mentioned Create React App ships with service workers. If not that, there's Workbox.js, which is another great library for kind of managing and harnessing your service workers. And so technologies like that let us, use the service worker part of that. But these are more about what happens within the application after your application is rendered by the service worker, or not rendered, but provided by the service worker. These are application frameworks that you can utilize to give your user a better offline experience. And service workers even let you do things like intercept API calls and handle them differently through a service worker than going to your API. They're really, really powerful and pretty cool to play with, but they're hard to wrangle. They're a little finicky when it comes to versioning. One tricky thing about service workers is once they're installed on the application or on the user's device, they're installed and you have to physically uninstall them or provide a new version of a service worker.
You being the application has to, or you have to get the user to do it?
The application has to. So you can do that with your code by checking to see if a service worker exists. In the Create React app, it comes with a little file that says register service worker. It has a bunch of dev and production things in there, but basically you can check if a service worker already exists, and if that service worker matches the same version as what this application is expecting, you can use it. Otherwise, you have to unregister it and then re-register, and so versioning service workers is tricky. And it's all through Chrome right now. So yeah, hard to version and test. The platform is almost ready. All these things that I'm talking about are mostly well supported. Obviously, Safari is dragging its feet. Service workers are a first-class citizen in Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and latest Safari desktop, but not mobile yet. So yeah, on PWAs, consider pulling back features. There's a reason why native apps are often 200 megs and our web apps aren't. There's a lot of business logic that can get caught up in things. So pull back on some of your features, is my opinion on PWAs. I think that's what a lot of great applications that have gone to users do. React and Redux is great, but maybe take a look at Preact or some more lightweight state management libraries. There's lots of options. We don't have to be stuck in the React and Redux sphere. Honestly, Redux is a little heavy at times, so give your users what they need. And then I'm going to show you a quick demo. If I can switch my screen here. All right. Okay, so this app is a little one that I built, and what's happening is right now I'm serving it locally, and you can see we're online and everything is good here. So if we go offline, so what I'm doing there is replacing the component. I'm detecting if an application is, that the application is offline, and I'm pulling back features now at that point. We might, just to make it easy, not letting them change their first name and last name and trying to make writes to the database is nice. So yeah, I'll give you a refresh to show you. So these two entries right now are coming from the database. I'm making a call out to Firebase, and they're returning this. So let's say Bob, Billy, and a phone number. So what I'm doing is I'm adding this, and once I add this, it's basically making a call to Firebase, giving me the result back that it was a correct write, and then I'm saving that in my Redux state and persisting it locally. And that way, when I go offline and I refresh the page, so you can see there's no network connectivity here. All this stuff is unable to connect. So in this case, I'm switching out components. I'm saying, hey, don't create when you're offline, but I'm also still persisting whatever state the person had, so that way it's usable. Maybe they want to use this app or be able to create when they're connected and only consume when they're not. And so yeah, this is being served by this service worker file here, which you can click into. And this is just the default Create React App one. But let's go back to the application. You can see if I unregister this service worker, so this is manually unregistering it, what happens now is I'm offline. So that's what a normal website would do right now without a service worker, is it would just fail. So it's great that by default now in Create React App, we're shipping offline stuff to users just by default. At least that allows us to, if anything, create our own kind of dinosaur app here. You know, we could create our own offline game if we wanted to. But yeah, I'll go back online. Go back online now, and you can see we're getting the bundle, going offline. And so some of the code here, I'll just share my entire screen. So some of the code here, we have this persist middleware. I'm using Redux Persist to basically persist the store in state. And then what the middleware provides is it rehydrates it. So I'm passing a, where am I passing this config? Oh yeah, I'm passing the config right here in the combine reducers, and there's a new key being created called root. So if I go and check out I'm just using local storage for this, you can see persist root, and this is the contents of all my Redux store right here. And then I also have this offline and online component. So you can see import offline and offline from React Detect. And here's my create contact workflow that I just only want to render when I'm online. And some of the stuff that this uses under the hood are a lot of cross-browser checks to see if we're online. And yeah, it's a cool little module. But I guess, were there any other questions? I know I covered a lot of really obscure information. Yeah.
So when you're on mobile then, on your Android device, does it give you access to other things you otherwise wouldn't be able to access on your phone?
Yeah.
As a regular web app?
So this is where it gets a little tricky, because the platform is so unique. So yes, when you install a progressive web app onto your Android device, what you're really doing is you're grabbing that app manifest file and the bundle, and what Android is doing is serving it in the same basically Chrome view, but without the URL toolbar. So you're getting that, but then some browsers, some like Samsung or specific manufacturers have their own APIs that are provided. So you can trigger certain system things for Android within there. So yeah, you're able to access Android-specific APIs, things like push notifications. I talked about syncing, even like camera access and contact access. A lot of those APIs are provided to Chrome in there for you to consume. So yeah, you can basically write a desktop app or a mobile native app with React, essentially, in that case. Yeah, on the install, it goes through all the permissions that it might need, things like camera, location, etc. But that's only available on Android right now, which is kind of a weird catch.
Are they going to change that? Because Android used to ask you when you install it from the App Store, do you give, it has all these permissions to allow this, and now it's more like iOS where as you use it in the app, it says, do you allow this? So it's kind of weird that it's going back to in the manifest.
My understanding is the manifest is trying to create a more app-like experience. Like you are, I think, having to define like what APIs are used in there. So yeah, I think I haven't gone through the install process. I have an iPhone. That's like, I'm talking about PWAs, I have an iPhone. I like the idea of them. But yeah, so the actual install process gets a little tricky there because different variants of Android and Chrome ask different things. So I don't know the entire UX there. But Gordon?
Yeah.
React app from some other boilerplate. And when I first started using the service worker thing, I updated my app and I refreshed on the browser, and it's still serving the old one.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find much documentation on how to properly do that, so I eventually just kind of turned off the service worker and moved it away in my browser and got it working. Do you know if there's any documentation somewhere?
For actual developers, it's tricky because the API is so new, and I think the Chrome. So, for instance, Chrome has its own kind of API that Firefox is trying to emulate, but you know how vendors go. And even within Chrome, there's certain things like the cache module within. There's a specific cache module caching strategy within a service worker. And I was just checking out an example repo, and somebody provided a polyfill for something, and it was like one of the Google guys doing it. So like there's spotty support. So my experience in shipping a service worker registration file is do as many checks as possible. Check if it's installed, check if a different version is installed. That's the hardest thing, is you're shipping these files that are kind of just poorly versioned, and they're not versioned by us, they're versioned by Chrome. So you're having to traverse their browser APIs, and yeah, it's tricky. But that's what I've heard that story from a lot of people. They say, I just uninstall it. Yeah.
Any of these, so for example, let's say the app's gone offline, it's a to-do list app, and the user's pushing a bunch of new to-dos to the app. Do any of these offline state management solutions, like, am I essentially pushing everything to an array, and then once it goes back online, it figures out the difference between what it was before it went offline and after, or is it just recording all those requests that the user's making, and then pushing those up like once? I was just kind of wondering how that's handled.
Yes. So there's different mechanisms. I think one of the hardest problems to solve is, and like I would hate to be a native developer today, because there's so much conflict in creating a diff if the server, for instance, has changes that your offline device doesn't know about, and maybe even schema changes too, and you're expecting to write a schema that the server doesn't understand once it comes back online, that's hard. So I have seen strategies where they cache the URL and basically cache the request, and in the UI you can do an optimistic update to say, hey, we'll respond to this. And then when you go back online, sometimes you end up, I've seen in UIs where it just has like merged next to it, or there'll be partial state resolutions and other things won't sync back up. So yeah, I've seen both strategies. Redux offline is one of the better things that I've seen that solves a lot of these problems. So Redux offline is actually a major dependency in the new AWS AppSync, if you guys are at all familiar with that. AWS AppSync was announced last week, I think, and it's AWS's own GraphQL implementation that works for React. Yeah, and so Redux offline is one of the major NPM packages in it, and it was actually written by another one of my coworkers, Yanni, and it's written for both mostly React Native because they have so many issues with native devices. You know, you want to use your native app when you're out hiking, but you don't have service, and then you get back online later and you have to resolve it. But yeah, to answer your question, I've seen both mechanisms where you can either just cache the request.
It's essentially just like a whitelist that you have to write around. It doesn't have like where with AppSync already has that sort of mechanism built in for pushing the new data up once it's back online. Like Redux offline doesn't include that like out of the box. It's something you have to build.
Redux offline would just be the client consuming part of it. You'd still have to have something server side to handle this unexpected state. But yeah, the Redux offline comes with a lot of clever hooks for optimistic updates, for persisting queries, and there was one other like major feature of it that is escaping me right now. But yeah, I'd suggest looking into that. That should be one of your first like libraries to spec out if you're planning to build a PWA with React. Cool.
Are there any good resources you can go to?
Yes, I'll actually provide a link to this GitHub repo later. I have a ton of resources that I found, but Google has great documentation on good methodologies when building a PWA, common strategies. Like I said, it's a mindset, so there's a lot of little things that you can do that help you get towards 100% on Lighthouse, which Lighthouse is a tool that you can run that basically says how well your app performs for users, how performant it is. So yeah, Google has some great docs. PWA.rocks has a couple great examples of progressive web apps. Within I think like the Preact community is very like PWA focused. I know like they're always trying to like slim down their bundles and code split all the things, and so yeah, I'd say maybe look into those. React in general is getting better, but I wouldn't say React is the best framework for a PWA today. But there's a lot of optimizations that we can do as developers to make it that way. Yeah.
Oh, silly question. The manifest file, so when the iPhone first came out, you had the add to home screen thing. Like that's been in there forever.
With the script tag, or the link tags, right? Or the tags in the head?
Yeah, so there's that, but I thought there was a way where you could point to like a JSON file and give it like a proper title along with the icon and all that sort of stuff. I'm just curious if that manifest file is the same, or if it's a new manifest that's just for PWA.
So it's actually very similar. This is the file. And so this isn't consumed. I don't believe iPhones consume this file. I think this is only consumed by Android devices. And what's in this file is basically that description of the favicons. And like I know forever you'd modify your HTML template to ship 4 different icons for iOS. Yeah. But with this manifest file, there's all sorts of things that Android and even, like I said, certain device manufacturers take into consideration. I think you can add certain keys here, like Samsung, and target specific Samsung features. But yeah, theme colors, how it displays within the web app Chrome, all that stuff. But I don't think iOS consumes this. I think it's just Android.
Okay, maybe I want to work that out. Cool, thanks.
Brad.
Hey, so is this kind of like Favicon where by naming convention it's called manifest.json, it sits on the web groups, that if you're using HTTP2 that it automatically comes with the first payload?
Are you asking if this manifest is the same as the app manifest for server push?
I guess, yeah.
No, they're different. So this would be more your client manifest.
This manifest was referenced by some sort of DOM element saying
I actually think it's referenced by the browser itself. In the case of Chrome,
yeah, so kind of like how there's nothing you have to do to get Favicon to load.
Yes.
By naming convention, the browser looks for it,
Yes.
so it looks for this.
Yes, is my understanding, yeah.
Okay.
Whereas the server push file, that's a
Different concept.
different concept. Yeah, it goes with all your actual assets, or yeah, server assets. Cool. Well, thank you all.